On today's show, we're looking at 5 mid-tier pitchers the Rangers could sign this free agency. If they're not wanting to go and spend at the top of the market, these are some guys I think could make sense. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. And before we get into these 5 free agent targets the Rangers could sign, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, before we get into these 5 episodes, just wanted a quick little fun note on this day a year ago. The Rangers went up 2-0 in the ALCS thanks to jumping on Framber Valdez early, a weird fielded bunt, and just a wacky kind of game 2 in that lovely ALCS, which we all know exactly how it turned out. But just wanted a fun little reminder today, since the Rangers are unfortunately not in the ALCS again this year. But let's get into these 5 mid-tier free agent starting pitchers. And actually, all 5 of these guys are pitchers who you have seen in the playoffs at least once, if not still active in these playoffs. Number 1 guy in this mid-tier class is Sean Manaea, who will be heading into his age 33 season, a left-handed pitcher for the New York Mets, coming off of a very, very good year, not only in the regular season, but in the postseason. He has been downright fantastic. Manaea has spent time with Oakland. He has spent time with the Padres, with the Giants, and most recently with the Mets. This is his best season of his career by far. He is the definition of a funky lefty, pitching off of that first base side of the rubber. If you want to go see some of his best highlights, go watch that at bat that he had against Shohei Ohtani in the NLCS, where Ohtani just had no idea where this was coming from. He is not a guy who throws incredibly hard. His fastball is an average of 92.3 miles an hour. He's coming off of a season where he made 32 starts, had around a 3.5 ERA in a little over 180 innings, a little bit more than a strikeout per inning pitched. He is a guy who does not walk a whole lot of guys, not an elite walk rate, but not a terrible walk rate either. He is a guy who is very, very difficult to pick up, who has been mostly pretty durable over the last few years. Last year with San Francisco, he was kind of a starting pitcher and kind of not a starting pitcher. San Francisco was doing a weird thing with the rotation. It was kind of 2024 Tigers-esque in that they only really had a couple of starting pitchers, and so Manaea would be a little bit of a bulk guy. He was a full-on starting pitcher at every other point in his career, and he'd only pitched out of the bullpen in a couple of games. He lost his spot in the rotation in 2022 with the Padres. He had a bad year. It was a very, very bad year, and not a great year with San Francisco last year, but he just figured something out this year. He figured out how to pitch, how to, attack hitters, how to make his stuff look more unseeable, more difficult to pick up, more difficult to, square up. And that's what he did a really good job of this year. He had a good strikeout rate in the top 1/3 of baseball, expected batting average also in the top 1/3 of baseball, still while pitching, in the low to maybe mid 90s. It's just a very, very difficult thing to hit, a very difficult kind of pitcher to see, not only for lefties, but also for righties. He had reverse splits, so he was better against righties than lefties. According to Spot Track, all of these contract estimates are according to Spot Track. He is projected to sign a 2-year, $29 million deal this offseason. I think after what he's done in the postseason, where I don't think that he has allowed an earned run just yet in this postseason run with the Mets. Excuse me. He has allowed a few, 5 innings of 2 earned runs against the Dodgers in the NLCS, and then a couple of different starts where he combined for 12 innings and just 3 runs in the other 2 starts that he had in the postseason, one against Milwaukee, one against Philadelphia, including a 7-inning, 1-run game against Philadelphia, an incredible pitching performance. And we'll probably see him at least once more in this NLCS against the Dodgers. he is a guy who is a late blooming lefty. And I think that the Rangers, especially if he does sign somewhere in the $30 million for 2-year contract range, $15 million a year for a guy like this, I think that's an incredible deal. He's going to be 33, so he is a little bit older, doesn't have a whole lot of wear and tear or a whole lot of injury history, at least recently. Had some shoulder issues when he was in Oakland back in 2017 to 2019 range. Didn't pitch a whole lot in 2019, but he's been fairly healthy, fairly consistent. He's a guy who I think could really help the Rangers, especially if they want to go spend some money on a bat or a elite reliever. Like trying to bring back Robertson and Yates might be a little costly. So if they are trying to save money on the edges, which I don't like, I don't want, but if they're going to do so, then I think Sean Manaea could be a great target for them. The next guy on this list, number 2, Michael Wacha, a guy who has been fairly consistent the last few years. He's been in the major leagues since 2013, spent a lot of time with St. Louis, made his one All-Star season back in St. Louis in 2015. That was pretty comfortably the best season of his career, 180 innings that year with a 3.38 ERA. But the last 3 years, he's kind of turned his career around. That a rough year in 2020 with the Mets, a rough final couple of years, actually just rough final year in St. Louis in 2019, was just straight up bad in Tampa Bay. But with Boston in 2022, he was very good that year. With the Padres in 23, he was pretty darn good. And this year with Kansas City, he was pretty darn good yet again. 29 starts, 166 and 2/3 innings, a 3.3 ERA, which is about what he's had the last 3 years. It's been around 120 to 160 innings, 127 in 2022 with Boston, 134 with San Diego, and then a jump up about 30 innings. This year, he's just been pretty darn consistent. He is what I would call a crafty righty. Not something that is often used, but he is a crafty righty. He uses 6 different pitches. He mixes them well. He is a changeup first guy, which is not something you see very often, but he throws his changeup nearly a third of the time. The 4-seamer is the next most used pitch. That's about a quarter of the time. Also use a sinker 15% of the time, also a cutter, also a slider, also a curveball. All of those at least 8% of the time. So he's a guy who really mixes his pitches. He can go a little deeper into games because he has so many weapons. He can save some of them for the second, third, or even fourth time through the order. He's not a guy who gets a whole lot of strikeouts because his stuff isn't exactly, unbelievable. I mean, the changeup is by far his best swing and miss pitch, but he does a good job of not getting squared up, not getting hit hard, getting down the mound, getting some extension. He is a Texas boy. He grew up in Texas, graduated from high school in Texarkana, went to A&M. So if you are an Aggie, you can let out a whoop here. It is appropriate. If you wanted to sign Michael Wacha, a former Aggie, he is a guy who is projected to sign a 3-year, $60.9 million deal. He is going into his age 33 season, so he is a little bit on the older side, but most of these guys are. They've already signed a couple of different free agency contracts, but 3 years, $60.9 million, $20.3 million average annual value. If he's getting you that, sub 3.5 ERA, 150 to 160 innings, making those 25 to 30 starts next year, and being your number 2 or 3 in a playoff series, I feel pretty good about that. This feels like a pretty solid bet. It's not flashy. It's not sexy. It's not, oh my gosh, we're going to go out and sign, Roki Sasaki, or, oh, we're going to go sign a Jacob deGrom, or, oh, we're going to go steal Garrett Cole out in free agency, or even the other 5 guys that I mentioned on yesterday's show that are more of the upper echelon of starting pitchers on the market. But he's a guy who is very reliable, who is very consistent, who is going to get you those innings. You feel pretty darn good about his health. Even though he is a little bit on the older side, he's also a pitcher, so their health is always going to be something of a question mark. But the consistency the last 3 years, more so than pretty much any other guy on this list, he has shown that track record of not just this year, not just last year, the year before it as well, and even earlier on in his career. He's a guy who knows how to pitch, and you know exactly what you're getting. It is, I think, the highest value of any of these guys that I have listed, $61-ish million for 3 years. But the reason for that is the track record, is the durability, is the knowing what you're getting in this guy. That is something that does have value. The Rangers have quite a few starting pitchers that I'm not sure exactly what they're getting, how many innings they're getting, or what level of quality they're getting. With Wacha, you'd have a reliable number two next to Jacob deGrom next year, and you'd feel pretty darn good about that if the Rangers end up signing him. Now, I think Kansas City's probably going to try and bring him back. He does technically have a player option for next year for $16 million. But after the season he's had, there is almost no way in heck he is not opting out and signing a much bigger and longer deal for next season. Coming up, we got a couple of other guys, a couple of righties and a lefty, one of whom, actually, two of whom are still in these playoffs. Talk about all that and more right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. We've got all kinds of odds from hockey, from football, from basketball to the World Series as well. Right now, the Yankees, a -105 favorites to win the World Series. Dodgers next favorites at +175. And then those feisty miracle New York Mets, the third favorites at +440. Or if you're feeling really good about a Guardians comeback and them going all the way, they are all the way down there at +1600. So go visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we'll be going through 5 different starting pitchers. Yet again, 5 more, but these ones are more in the bargain bin if the Rangers are not looking to spend big, a little bit more financially feasible or responsible with somebody else's money. But let's get to the number 3 pitcher on this list, the mid-tier guys, Jack Flaherty, the Dodgers right-handed pitcher who is still in these playoffs, coming off of what has been one of the best seasons of his career, if not the best. I'm willing to say it's almost the best. He finished 4th in Cy Young voting in 2019 as a 23-year-old with the Cardinals. Injuries really derailed his career with the Cardinals. I mean, he was fantastic back in 2018 as a rookie. I mean, he had a sub 3.5 ERA in over 150 innings, nearly over 180 strikeouts that year, finished somehow 5th in Rookie of the Year voting back in 2018. Don't remember exactly who was a rookie in the National League that year. They must have been absolutely amazing. But I mean, finishing top 5 in Cy Young as a 23-year-old, getting MVP votes as well that season. This year, coming off of a pretty darn good season, a 3.17 ERA, made 28 starts, a little over 160 innings, nearly 200 strikeouts, 194. Was traded midseason from Detroit to the Dodgers. Was a little bit better with Detroit in his 18 starts there. Had an ERA south of 3 and 133 strikeouts in those 106 and 2/3 innings. Has been pretty darn good in the playoffs. Not incredible, but has had a couple of good games. And the thing that makes him so darn good is his breaking balls. He's got a slider and a knuckle curve, both of which are very freaking good. He's not a guy who is pitching in the mid to upper 90s as much anymore. Fastball velo averages 93.2 miles an hour, but the slider and the knuckle curve are fantastic pitches. Both of them. Excellent pitches. He's coming off of a season where he spent time with St. Louis, was traded to Baltimore at the deadline, and was just straight up bad for Baltimore. Baltimore needed a starting pitcher. They needed starting pitching help. I don't think the Rangers even saw him in that series in the ALDS where the Rangers swept the Orioles en route to their first ever World Series championship. But Flaherty just did not look good and had a history of injuries the past few seasons, had a history of being, not an effective pitcher really as much anymore. Had a ERA just one tick below 5 in 2023, a 4.99 ERA, spending time with St. Louis and Baltimore. This year signed a buy low deal with the Tigers. Tigers got what seems to be their future shortstop in Trey Sweeney at the deadline for Jack Flaherty, and I think some other prospects as well. Dodgers really needed some starting pitching help, and Flaherty is one of 2 remaining starting pitchers that the Dodgers have. I mean, they're having to go bullpen games for probably a third of this NLCS. But Flaherty has been really darn good for them. He's projected to sign a 3-year, $60.7 million deal. $7 million deal, not 60 point. $20 a year would be a heck of a bargain for Jack Flaherty. That is quite a bit low, below the MLB minimum, just $0.2 million or 200,000 below what Michael Wacha is projected to sign. That is the second most of these guys in this tier. He is going into his age 29 season, only just turned 29, a couple weeks ago in October. So he's still pretty young, still, even though he's been in the major leagues for what feels like so long. It honestly is so young. He came up to the bigs as a 21-year-old back in 2017. So he's been in the bigs for 8 seasons, still has a lot of, I think, upside of these guys. I think he has the highest upside of, what his best season could look like. He had the best season, I think, of any of these guys this year. And depending on what you value, whether you value innings more, whether you value strikeouts more, he is a guy who had a 10.8 Ks per 9 this year. So he is a guy who you can trust in the playoffs, guys who have that kind of strikeout stuff, more than strikeout per inning. That's more of a playoff kind of caliber starter, which I think Flaherty can be. I was a little skeptical, but then digging into his numbers of what he actually did this year, I remembered what he did last year in Baltimore when Baltimore traded for him at the deadline, hoping that he would fix their rotation, and he did not even improve it or even improve their bullpen really at all. But this is a great season for Flaherty, a good time for him to be coming into free agency. There's a lot of other really good starting pitchers in this free agent class, but I think if the Rangers come away with Flaherty as their only starting pitcher that they sign, I think that would be a solid addition. Next guy on this list is Jose Quintana, coming off of heading into his age 36 season, another left-handed starting pitcher for the Mets. Coming off of these guys, I think that obviously Wacha has the strongest track record of the last 3 seasons. But since 2022, the only one that's close to him in terms of success in all of those years is Quintana. I mean, he was fantastic in 2022, spent some time with Pittsburgh, then was traded midseason to the Cardinals, where he was absolutely incredible, just truly incredible in that stretch run. A 2.01 ERA in 12 starts down the stretch with St. Louis. Last year with the Mets, only pitched 75 and 2/3 innings. That's last year as in 2023, not this season. That around a 3.5 ERA was fine, not spectacular. This year, much better, especially down the stretch. Ended up with a 3.75 ERA in 31 starts, 170 innings. That is kind of more the bulk that the Rangers would be looking for in whoever they signed. It was much better after around June. Early on this season, he struggled quite a bit, had a little bit of a rough month of August. But in terms of the second half, he was significantly better. A 3.18 ERA in 12 starts after the All-Star break, 68 innings there. Still not a guy who's going to strike out a whole lot of guys. He is kind of, think of more of that class of Cody Bradford, because he's not throwing very hard either. A 90.7 mile-an-hour fastball. That's the average velocity on his fastball, using majority of sinkers and four-seamers. Also has a curve and a changeup and a slurve. Breaking balls aren't that great. Changeup is okay, but the fastballs play very well. He is a guy who has pitched so many years. I mean, he has been in the big leagues for such a long time. I mean, 359 career games, 333 career starts. Next year, if he gets to 30 and a third innings, he will hit 2,000 innings in the big leagues. He's been consistent, a back into mid-rotation starter. He's a guy who you can trust to start playoff games. So this year in the playoffs, he has been very good for the Mets. Went 6 shutout innings against the Brewers in the wild card series. He went 5 innings of just 1 unearned run against the Phillies. Has not pitched yet in the NLCS. I believe he is scheduled for tonight as I am recording this. But he's been very darn good. And maybe the postseason is inflating my fascination with these guys, but especially for the contract that he's projected to sign. 2 years, $16.6 million. That's $8.33 million average annual value, a 2-year deal. He's a little bit on the older side, but he has been so darn consistent these last few years. Even if he ends up, catching up, being caught up to by Father Time. That's not a whole lot that you're investing, not a super long-term contract, not a whole lot of risk there. And I think the upside is really darn good. I think he probably signed somewhere more in the 2 year to $20 million range of 10 million a year, just because he's been so darn good in these playoffs. And that always plays a factor in the minds of GMs heading into the winter, especially since he is a member of the New York Mets and Steve Cohen has seemingly unlimited cash. It might take quite a bit to convince him to sign elsewhere. But he's a guy who the Rangers ended up with him as their starting pitcher that they signed this offseason, especially at a deal like that. I think that would be a fantastic bargain for Texas. Coming up, we're going to look at one more guy and kind of a big picture look of what are the Rangers looking for this free agency and how does these mid-tier pitchers factor into all of that and more right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to get your tickets for all the live events you're looking to go to. Whether it is football that you want to head out to, is it college football, or check out a Cowboys game, or you want to go watch some Mavs or some, at this point, still undefeated Dallas Stars hockey, there is no better place to get your tickets for all those live events. Or if you want to go check out some concerts or, theater, anything near you, all of this, the best place to get tickets to all of those things is on Game Time. They've also got priority Game Time picks. The curation makes it easier to save more on sports, comedy, theater, and more. They've got flash deals. They've got all-in pricing, so you can see if you toggle this feature up front exactly what you're paying. No surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action in sports in most states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join the over 10 million users and sign up today. Prize Picks puts members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my pick hits, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Now, shout out to the everydayers who make Locked On Rangers first listen every single day. On Friday's show, I'll be looking at a bigger picture. What do the Rangers need? What can they afford? What kind of makes sense for Texas this free agency and this offseason as in terms of what the heck are they going to do? Now, the last guy on this mid-tier pitcher list is a guy who you may be wondering, why is he on this list? And that is Frankie Montas, a right-handed pitcher who has spent time with Oakland. He has spent time with the Yankees. He has split his time last season between Cincinnati and Milwaukee. Was not great for Cincinnati, an ERA north of 5 in 19 starts. He made 30 starts last season at a 4.84 ERA combined with Cincinnati and Milwaukee. It's a little bit better in Milwaukee. Still not great. Had some moments of greatness. He's still got some upside. I mean, his best career season was back in 2021 as a 28-year-old with the Oakland A's, a 3.37 ERA, 32 starts, 207 strikeouts in 187 innings. Finished 6th in Cy Young voting that year. He still never made an all-star team, even though in 2019, he definitely deserved it. A sub-3 ERA in 16 starts, only 96 innings for him that year, though. He's had some shoulder issues, cost him most of 2023, a little bit of time in 2022 as well. He was kind of an upside play for the Reds, who couldn't really afford to spend at the top end of free agency last year, but wanted a starting pitcher who kind of had the upside where if things went well, that he could be, a number 1, number 2, at least number 3 caliber starting pitcher. And last year he just wasn't that. I think that at his contract that he is listed to potentially sign 2 years, $26 million, a $13 million average annual value. I think there's some upside there for the Rangers. I wouldn't be surprised if he just signs a 1 year, $10 to $12 million contract. This was not a good season for him, but again, the consistency in coming back, showing that he is healthy, coming back from the shoulder issues that plagued him the year before. That is a good sign. The upside is still there. Still got a very, very good off-speed pitch, a splitter that is very effective. But other than that, it was a rough season for him. Maybe this is just me scrounging for a fifth pitcher to include on this list. But let's kind of look big picture at this. I think the Rangers have quite a bit of cash to sign. According to Spot Track, they're, I believe, around $70-ish million away from hitting that luxury tax. I think that is going to be a hard cap for the Rangers this year of making sure they want to get out of that luxury tax. Ray Davis has talked about that, or well, he is through the mouthpiece of Chris Young said, hey, we're trying to not be in that repeater tax. The Rangers were in it in 2023 when they won the World Series. They were in it again this year when they were not good. They got a lot of money coming off of the books. And in terms of how many pitchers they need right now, I'd say maybe they only get one starting pitcher. Maybe they sign two, because right now you're looking at your rotation of DeGrom, Kumar Rocker, Tyler Mahle, Cody Bradford, John Gray, and then your depth options at your 6-7 starter is Dane Dunning and Jack Leiter. I honestly think there's a chance that the Rangers just DFA Dunning after this year, or after this season during this winter. He's projected to make around, I believe, $5, maybe $7 million in arbitration this year. And he's coming off of an awful season. I mean, the Rangers sent him to AAA at the end of the year, which felt very, very shocking, especially given that in 2023, he was Rangers pitcher of the year. He was the innings leader. He was very, very good, very helpful bridge for the Rangers in 2023, stepping up when Jacob deGrom went down, not as the Rangers number 1 or number 2 or number 3, basically they're number 5, but he provided some quality innings, some quality starts for him. This year, they just kind of fell off a cliff, started walking the world and allowing a whole lot of home runs. And when you aren't, gassing up in the upper 90s and you can't really get away with that, that is not something that's super sustainable. So I think the Rangers, maybe they just sign one starting pitcher this year. I'd prefer them to go in that upper tier of the guys that I talked about on yesterday's show, the potential aces. Also, by the way, I made the joke about Clayton Kershaw yesterday. We finally did get some clarity that Kershaw said it's going to be the Dodgers that he pitches for next year. So we literally do not have to do that whole song and dance of, is Clayton Kershaw finally going to end his career in Texas? No, it's not happening. But the Corbin Burns, the Blake Snell, Max Fried, Shane Bieber, those are more the guys I would prefer the Rangers to sign. If they do go with somebody in this tier, it will probably allow them more money to go and try and get Yates and Robertson back and maybe one other reliever in that kind of upper tier. I don't love spending big money on relievers, but Robertson, I feel pretty confident. And if you're going to give him $10 million a year, he's going to be worth it because he is so darn consistent. Yates is coming off of an absolutely phenomenal year. I think he is much closer to going back to just being one of the best relievers in baseball, which he was this year. And he was back in 2018 and 2019. And I think after those injuries that derailed his career in 2020 through 2022, I mean, he was fine in 23 with the Braves, and he was excellent this year with the Rangers. I think if he can go back to being that, he's still got, I think plenty of years left as an elite reliever, and I think he'd be worth that money. I would honestly rather the Rangers just throw a blank check at Juan Soto and bring him in here. I don't think that's likely because literally everybody's going to be in on Juan Soto. But in terms of the amount of cash the Rangers have to spend, I mean, you look at the back end of that rotation, of how many guys in there are you going to be able to count on for 150, 160, 170 innings? Any of them? Are any Rangers starters that are currently slotted in going to get to 150 plus innings? I'm honestly not all that confident. And of those guys that I mentioned, of DeGrom, Rocker, Mahle, Bradford, Gray, I think Bradford is the one that I'm most confident in getting to at least 150 innings. With DeGrom, I'm hoping that he can get there. I'm hoping that he can make 30 plus starts and, be off of an innings limit, off of a extreme pitch count limit, and be healthy and ready to go dominate in October, and that the Rangers are even there in October where it matters if he's healthy at the end of the season because they are making playoff starts. Rocker, I don't know what the plan is for him next year. I don't think anybody but the Rangers know in terms of how many starts he's going to make, what kind of limits they're going to be on there, which is why I'd feel more comfortable if the Rangers do sign one or two starting pitchers. Not that I would like to push Gray and Bradford out of the rotation, which at this point they signed two guys. That's probably what would happen. Or maybe they start Rocker in the minor leagues, even though I think he would be one of their best options. I think that maybe starting him in the minor leagues allows you to kind of massage that innings limit, massage the pitch count, not put him through too much in the first full season coming back from TJ surgery. And Malley has not been exactly the picture of health. He had a shoulder, soreness that put him on the IL after 3 starts back from TJ surgery this year. They were expecting probably more than 3 starts in the 12-ish innings or so they gave him. And Gray has spent 7 trips on the IL in the last 3 seasons. So it's not like you can necessarily count on him a whole lot. And then behind that, Dunning, I don't know what they're getting from him this year. Leiter, I feel like they're in a similar situation as to where they were last year of you're not quite sure if this guy's ready to be an everyday starter in your rotation. You think he's got that upside, but if you're relying on him to be that, which the Rangers had to this year, they had to rely on Jack Leiter starts, even before he was ready, which is why he was called up so soon. Then you're not in a spot where you're feeling good about your ability to contend. So I think one of these guys is probably more likely than the Rangers spending big at the top end of the free agent market. I think it's definitely possible for them to play at that top end and bring back a Yates and a Robertson and maybe one more reliever and whatever batch they're needing to bring in. But still, I think if you're trying to protect yourself and your hopes for what's going to happen this winter, I think that someone in this list, whether it's Flaherty, Manaea, Wacha, or Quintana, Frankie Montas, looking back, maybe I shouldn't have included him on this because I would not be that excited if that's the one starting pitcher the Rangers signed this offseason. But of those other 4, maybe it's a little bit of playoff biases, but those guys are coming off of fantastic seasons. I think they're going to be sought after. And if the Rangers go and want to be aggressive and make sure they get one of those guys while everyone else is still, gawking at signing a Blake Snell or what it's going to take to sign a Corbin Burns, the Rangers go and get aggressive on one of those guys. I think that could be a really smart option for how they play it this winter. But that's going to do it for today's show. I'll be back tomorrow talking about some of the bargain bin guys, including one really, really interesting guy who might be better than every single pitcher I just mentioned today. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.